right, it is 11:01, and in the interest of respecting everyone's time this Friday, we are going to get started. So happy Friday, y'all. Welcome back to school. For some, it's the first week, some it's the second week. It is that time of year where Houstonians get acclimated to more buses on the road, more children in schools. The city is back, classrooms are in full swing. The weather is not giving me sunny and bright today, but I will be sunny and bright in my mood. So we're 3 weeks into the school year, and there are a lot of conversations happening around this accountability system. Like, what are the ratings? How did students perform? For some of us, what is accountability? I see news that it's being held up. I don't even know what that is. Well, today we're hoping to give our listeners some insights on accountability, why you should care about it, and just talk a little bit about it. First, I'm going to introduce myself. Hello, friends. My name is Maron, and I work here at Good Reason Houston, where I am doing these monthly webinars, and I encourage you to join all of them. I'm going to introduce our guests here, Dr. Amine and Patrick Gill. Dr. Amine is a student achievement and data guru. She is deeply passionate about education, individualized learning, and data-driven instruction. Dr. Amina's worked both domestically and internationally, teaching, leading, learning. She's worked in K through 12 and higher education. She's worked in STAAR ISD as an executive director and assistant superintendent, and she now serves in Alief, being hashtag Alief proud as chief of school improvement and accountability. So she's basically the perfect person to help us shed some light on what accountability is. Patrick is Good Reason Houston's Director of Research and Strategy, and he is thinking constantly about how to creatively use data to tell a story of what's happening in our schools. And he helps us identify creative and impactful solutions to some pretty big problems. Before his current work, he worked in ed research with Rice University's Houston Education Research Consortium and Children at Risk. He's led a lot of studies in post-secondary success, early childhood, school quality, and he's also been a teacher himself. So you bring a lot of good context to today's conversation. Before we start, we would love to know who's joining us today. Like, how much do you know about accountability? Why are you invested in it? We'd love to just know a little bit about the people that are on the call with us. So thank you for joining. We will drop a quick poll. And if you guys could just take about 30 seconds to just answer the poll. Yeah, okay. Got some parents, ooh, some educators. Thank y'all for joining us. You make this whole system move. We appreciate you. Community members, elected official. All right, cool. Thank y'all so much. So looking at our poll, we've got a bit of a mix. We've got this is an intro for me. I just know the basics, pretty well versed. And then we've got two people who know a lot, and we should have had them as guests. Please feel free to drop your name in the chat so we can connect with you later. We love to get more people for Thought Partnership. Thank you so much. We got a couple more people dropping into the poll. Let's give it a couple of seconds. All right, so Patrick, when you're looking at this poll, kind of seeing what we've got here, and I know that you've done some research with Wakefield and also with your role at Good Reason on just parent sentiments and community sentiments. You have anything you want to share with us while people are doing the poll around, what Houston area folks think about accountability?
Yeah, thanks, Miran. In 2023, Good Reason Houston, in partnership with Wakefield Research, did a survey of Houston region parents and caregivers on kind of their views of education in general. And one of the focuses of the survey was on the accountability system. And so what we found was that nearly 6 in 10 Houston area parents thought that the Texas Education Agency's accountability rating system were a valuable resource. Of the 4 in 10 who thought the ratings were less valuable, the two most common concerns were about whether the ratings adequately incorporate factors that they consider important to school quality and whether or not the ratings are fair to different types of schools. On the flip side, the majority of parents who found the ratings helpful appreciated how the system helps them better understand whether their schools are meeting their children's academic needs and helps them find high-quality school options. They also appreciated how easy the ratings are to understand and that they provide objective information. To me, these findings were really instructive for our goals with this webinar here today, because I think many of these things can be and indeed are true all at once. And I hope as we dive further into what the accountability system is and isn't, we can better understand the goals and intent behind it.
Appreciate that, Patrick. I love a good parent sentiment and just hearing what the community thinks. I think it's interesting, 60% find it valuable. I definitely feel the systems help them better understand. I know for me, the A through F rating is like, it's just simple. Like it's easy to access, like A, B, C, you know what I mean? Like we've all grown up with that. So we typically can just look at the letter and get some level of understanding of school quality. But I will say, other than whatever notion I have about A, B, C, D, outside of, and even as educators sometimes, like understanding what that letter means is a little, like, it can be a little tricky. So I wanted to pause before we get into some really fun myth busting and just ask, could y'all just give an overview, especially looking at the poll? Looks like we've got half of the people where it's an intro or like they kind of know the basics. Dr. Amine, can I ask you to just give us, you don't have to go deep into the TEA formula, but like give us a headline under baseline understanding of what does that letter grade mean? Where did it come from? What goes into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are many ways to think about the accountability system, right? So one way is to think about the accountability system as kind of a way for us to process monitoring, analyzing performance of individuals, of institutions for improvement purposes. We can think about it in many different contexts. We have an accountability system for us in education. It could be also in the context of business, of government. It could be implemented with teams, departments. There's a lot of research that really talks about elements of effective accountability systems. Our public schools have an accountability system. So when we think about the accountability system, if you go back to just the previous slide for a second, the intent of our accountability system is to continuously improve student performance. The intent and design of the system is to eliminate achievement gaps based on race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. And the intent and design of the system is to ensure that we as a state are leaders in preparing our students for post-secondary success and really life beyond kind of our school system. So that's really the intent, the design of the system, and the purpose. So if you move to the next slide, I think that's when we can just maybe share kind of an overview, high-level overview of really the way this system is designed. So for us, the system is designed based on multiple areas that we call domains. So domain 1 is what we call the student achievement domain. This is where we look at the performance of students on the statewide assessment program, and we evaluate that performance, and we include it in that domain. For high school, we also look at the statewide performance, as well as college, career, and military readiness indicators, and we look at graduation and graduation rates. So we incorporate those factors into this first domain. For domain 2, we kind of look at it twofold. The first part of that domain, we look at student growth. Did students grow from one year to another? The second part of that domain, this is where we incorporate the factor of free and reduced or applications or economically disadvantaged indicators, where we try to level the playing field to assess the performance of campuses. For domain 3, this is where we incorporate the performance of student groups into that domain. So when we look at the system in general, it does have these different domains that give us different types of information. We look at the first 3 and we take the best of those and we weigh that at 70%. And then we take the third domain and we weigh that at 30%. And then we put the two together, and that really what gives us our accountability rating system that we know, kind of translated into like an A through F rating. I know it's brief, it's high level, but in a nutshell, that's kind of, you know, how we put all of those pieces together to come up with the A through F ratings.
So here's my big takeaway listening to that is that the accountability rating is a measure of academic performance for the school, right? Schools are there to teach. It's an academic performance, and it has this balanced mix of growth, proficiency, and post-secondary readiness. So it's like, how much are kids growing, but also how much are they achieving? And then how ready are we making them for the future? If I had to like sum it up in a claims, feel about right? Okay.
Definitely based on the academic performance. Yes. Yes.
All right. Awesome. Does it change? Like, have we had the same accountability system for X amount of years? Again, before we get into myths, just want some baseline knowledge. What does that look like? Are there changes? Do they happen when and what?
Yeah, there have been changes to the system. So kind of the way it was originally formulated, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more in a second, but it was originally formulated to be refreshed and updated by the Texas Education Agency every few years. And actually last year, 2023, was one of those years where we kind of had a more substantial change to how the ratings were calculated. So as the data guy, I'll get a little weedsy on this one and talk about how some of those changes happened across the three domains we just discussed. The first is in domain one, specifically related to college, career, and military readiness, or CCMR calculations for high schools. This was one of the more significant changes to the calculations, and it was based on internal studies that TEA did in looking at how well its current system was preparing graduates for their post-secondary lives. After doing those studies, TEA realized that they could raise the bar for how many graduates have to be considered college, career, or military ready at high school graduation in order for a high school to receive an A or a B. So those criteria of what counted as an A or a B increased for high schools. Looking at domain two, specifically domain 2A, which looks at student growth, they changed how those growth scores are calculated by ensuring that the ratings capture year-over-year growth of additional student groups that may previously not have been included due to small size. So that calculation actually became more comprehensive by being able to look at more students in looking at school scores there. And finally, in the third domain, domain three, closing the gaps, that also changed. Previously, scores were based on whether different student groups met the benchmarks set for them in kind of a yes-no format that didn't account for those campuses and districts as much that were making progress towards those benchmarks for their various student groups. So now, after the changes that happened last year, there's kind of a more gradated scoring system, and progress towards those goals for different student groups is also recognized, which I think is a positive change. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a minute ago that this was a planned update based on kind of the way the system was originally structured. So TEA made these changes because they are last year because they're required to by law. The Texas legislature requires periodic updates of the rating system to try to better reflect what's actually happening in schools. When they were making that decision, the legislature also considered asking TEA to make more marginal updates to the system each year, as opposed to what they ultimately settled on, which is what we saw last year, which is kind of major changes after a set number of years with similar ratings. If they had gone with the marginal changes year over year, this would have meant that there were fewer significant changes like what we saw last year, but it would have also made it difficult to compare schools and districts' progress over time because the ratings calculations would have been constantly changing. And this idea of kind of moving the goalposts each year for districts and schools meant that they also wouldn't have had something concrete to aim for going into the following school year because those goals would have been constantly in flux. So instead, the legislature opted to make larger changes every 5 years, which in theory should give us 5-year periods in which we can look at change and progress with comparable ratings calculations year after year. Another benefit of the periodic changes decision, these 5-year changes, is that it allows TEA time to study their rating system really in depth and see how well it's preparing students to inform those future changes, which is exactly what they did, for example, in ultimately changing the CCMR parameters.
Appreciate that. My first year as a principal, remember my principal manager, they were called SSOs at the time. Shout out Miss Diana Gibson Johnson if you are. I remember she said, "Can you ever turn the news on and it's the same?" And I was like, "No." And she said, "The world is constantly changing, so you always have to look at your practices and change along with them." And so that's something that stuck with me. And I was just thinking when you were talking. We have a good baseline of what accountability is. We understand that it changes to constantly reflect changes needed. There are implications for the changes. And today, we're not talking about that. We're actually going to bust some myths around accountability now that I think we've got a good foundation of what it is and what goes into it. Let's talk a little bit more about what it is. And for those people who are tuning in with us live, we also want you to engage with us. So throughout the webinar, if you have questions, comments, please drop them in. If you are looking at your screen, if you're on a desktop, I think it actually works this way on a phone too. At the bottom, you should see that there's a button that says Q&A. And using that button, you can drop in questions that will go directly to us. And at the end of this, we've set aside some time to answer those questions. So if you have something you just want to chat in, feel free to hit that chat button. If you have questions that you would like answered at the end, please don't wait till the end. As they pop into your head, shoot them into the question box. I'll be collecting them and we'll be answering them at the end. So we ask that you engage with us. This is only as purposeful as what you get from it. Yep, we want to hear from you. What are you wondering? What do you want to hear more about? And I'm going to drive us into busting some myths around accountability. So let's talk about some commonly held myths that we've heard around accountability. First myth, let's pop them all up on the screen so people know where we're going. The teacher in me still feels like I should have everything for the lesson up front. So accountability myths. So today we're going to go through some 4 myths. Accountability is meant as a performance tool used to evaluate children and teachers. Number 2, accountability ratings are not valuable because they don't tell the full student story. 3, if a school is rated an A or B, it means all students are performing on grade level. And lastly, the work stops when accountability is delayed. So these are just some myths we'll be talking through today. Let's start with the first one. It seems like we often operate with thinking of the accountability system in terms of children and a performance tool for students and teachers, and an evaluation like that is the meat of it. So I want to ask you guys, as the people who know this deeply, is this the intent of the system, or is this what it was built around? Is this a myth?
Yeah, I think this idea that it's intended as a punitive tool kind of against students and teachers really is a myth, because at its core, our accountability system here in Texas and just in general across the country, the way accountability systems are intended is they're supposed to be geared towards system level accountability. They're designed to ensure that the educational system as a whole is meeting its responsibilities, and in particular about holding districts and schools accountable to providing quality education to all students, rather again than evaluating the performance of individual teachers or students. Accountability systems are a tool for identifying areas of need and ensuring that resources are directed towards those areas, be they particular campuses, geographic regions, et cetera. They're, again, about this system level, let's look at it in a holistic way and try to identify where we need to be working harder to ensure that students are getting the education they deserve. Accountability systems allow us to make data-driven decisions, which is really key, in particular, as we're trying to close gaps and address areas where there is more need. This data ensures that schools have the supports they need. So if a school does need additional resources, tools like the accountability system allow us to identify that and then direct resources accordingly. And by doing so, I think something that often gets lost in the conversation on accountability systems is that they're really driven with an equity mindset. They are aimed at addressing gaps and to identify disparities in the education system where we're currently not serving students in the way they deserve, and to try to close those gaps. And as we saw when we were talking about the accountability system here in Texas, that's really, I think, core to the design of the system. It's like that is what Domain 3 is doing at its core, is trying to close gaps between different student groups.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, you jump in, Dr. Amine.
So I think, you know, unfortunately, that's sometimes how it feels, and maybe that's sometimes how it's used or more misused. So it's important for us to understand that really the intent and purpose behind the accountability system is not a teacher evaluation tool, and it should not really be used to judge students. The accountability system, as its purpose and design, is meant, just like you said, as an accountability for a system, for districts, for the purposes really to kind of continuously improve. So that's kind of the intent of it. There are separate teacher evaluation tools and systems to assess teachers with the intent to help them grow. And there's so much more that goes into growing teachers and supporting them as they improve their craft and proficiency so that they can help more students, you know, improve and grow as well. The same way, there's so much more that goes into growing students and making sure that they advance their proficiency at the skill level, right? Not, you know, the accountability systems kind of summarizes the assessment data, but what we need to improve student proficiency is really that skill level, that skill set, and kind of closing that skill, that gap to ensure that they are advancing their proficiency, but also academically as well as emotionally and socially.
Yeah, I think this focus on this idea of continuous improvement at the student level, at the system level, I think is really key to the way the system is designed, because it lets us, again, identify where we need to be working harder, where we need to devote more resources, and then hopefully through doing so, we're able to improve system-wide for all students. I think the last thing I'll say on kind of like what the accountability system allows us to do is that it honestly, it provides transparency and helps us build trust as an education system with the broader public to like understand how schools are currently doing and what we need to be doing better. Because without this transparent, fairly easy to understand system, it's often difficult. Like as a parent myself, sometimes it's hard to tell, like, is my kid getting what he needs, you know, every day in the classroom? And like something like this really kind of helps us be able to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to move us along so we can do the myths. But what I'm hearing is that we've got this myth that it is a performance tool. And the reality is performance matters. We have TIA, we have T-tests in the way that Dr. Amine, there are tools for that. We're not saying it doesn't matter, but this particular accountability was built on the idea of really acting like a flashlight that illuminates bright spots and also areas for improvement. And it's a way to look at a system as a whole and think about what should we be doing, but also using data to focus on subgroups and equity and what do we need to do, identify those areas where we need to work with subgroups, but also just like the system as a whole. So I appreciate that, giving some clarity. And also we've got questions coming in. Thank y'all, keep them coming. I'm going to move us along to ensure that we have time at the end to answer those questions. All right, accountability myth number 2 that we're busting. Accountability ratings are not valuable because they do not tell the full student story. You know, we said at the beginning when you gave Dr. Amine and Patrick an idea of what it is, this is an academic-based evaluation. And so we hear sometimes that they're not valuable because they don't tell the full story of a student's full experience. Before we get into this, I do want to say, bottom line, accountability does matter. And, you know, Commit did some research in 2022 where they checked, like, do these accountability ratings actually line up with what we want for kids post-secondary success? And so I've just pulled a couple of pieces from that. We'll share the full research with you in our follow-up email you'll all get. won't read this to you. You all can read it on the screen, but as it's up on the screen, I wanted to talk about that myth. Bottom line, accountability matters. And the myth is that they're not valuable because they don't tell the full student story. So Patrick and Dr. Amine, tell us about that myth. What are your thoughts?
So I think the accountability system that we have is definitely based on a set of indicators that we chose to include. Just to your point, Moran, academic indicators. So we summarize them at a high level and include them in the accountability system. We have to always look at it in the context that it was created for. The purpose of the accountability system is to measure these indicators that we have selected. That's the context. The context is that design that it was selected for. When it comes to student experiences can come from so many other areas, including these indicators that we have selected. So we know that a student's experience in many cases is much more than a letter grade, but accountability still matters, and we can hold both truths at the same time. So I want to, I think this is just maybe to clarify, I want to make sure that our listeners kind of understand that accountability matters. It's not the end all and be all. There are additional ways that we use to measure the student's experience. Another way to look at it is the student's experience comes from a range of factors at our schools. When interacting with their teachers, interacting with their friends, their peers, it comes from involvement in extracurricular activities, athletics, fine arts, debate, so many sources. So the accountability system helps us measure a specific set of indicators and is based on a number of those academic indicators and post-secondary outcomes. It is important, and it is important in the context that it's based on.
Appreciate that. Yeah. I think as a parent, you're right. Like the letter grade does not give the full experience of my child's interactions and how, all the things that go into a school. And they are a really good foundation and a critical data point for deeper discussion about school performance. So they truly do matter. And in the way that you were saying, we have to look at the context by which they were created. And they were created to assess how students are doing academically, proficiency, growth. And there's also data that shows that they are, very much connected to how students do in post-second after high school success. And at the same time, I love that you said we can hold both truths at the same time. We can hold both, that we know that a student's experience is more than the letter grade, and that accountability is a really big factor in that conversation. So thank you. Thank you for the nuance of that, which I think sometimes can be difficult in conversation, is to hold two truths. I value that. Patrick, do you have anything you want to add?
Just really quickly, I think the last thing that's worth noting is going back to the idea of like transparency and public trust. One of the benefits of the accountability system is that they are, in theory, it's easily accessible to find a school's like letter grades. And it's also something that like we all kind of intuitively understand. It's something that's comparable. It allows us as parents to make decisions. It allows us as, researchers and people that are invested in ensuring that all students are receiving the education they deserve, that it's a comparable way to see how that picture actually looks kind of across the broad swath of the education system. So I don't want the like relative ease of understanding and the transparency it creates to get lost in the conversation.
Yep. All right. Thank y'all. Accountability is the best tool we have. We encourage everyone to use it. I will say, for those that need additional context and data, there's texasschools.gov that does give a little bit more context about the student's experience. And also, sometimes it's that knowledge lives within your child, your involvement in the school. The things that matter to different families are different. And so you may have part of your student's experience that deeply matters to you as a family. And we encourage you to look into that and think about it. And, those things matter as well. And the accountability tool is the best tool we have to give us a view on how students are doing with learning and skills. And, what schools are essentially meant to do is transfer knowledge. And so the accountability tool helps us measure how much knowledge is being transferred to the student, and that knowledge is what's going to carry them out into the world. So thank you guys for engaging in what can be a very nuanced conversation or a nuanced myth. All right, I am going to move us along our third myth. This one, very interesting. A grade of an A or B means that most students are performing on grade level. So if I see a school and it is an A, they're all reading on grade level, right? Everybody. No, maybe.
Well, I think that's a really great question, Miran, and I think that to the point about nuance, I think this is getting into that nuance a little bit. So I want to talk first kind of about how the ratings are calculated a little bit, and in particular the what it actually means to pass the STAAR exam and to be counted in accountability. So the way the STAAR exam is scored, there's kind of 4 levels of performance. There's did not meet grade level, there's approaches grade level, meets grade level, and master's grade level. And actually, to pass the exam, the state considers the standard the approaches level rather than the meets level. So when we talk about all students meeting on grade level, a student doesn't necessarily have to achieve at that meets level in order to be considered passing, and in order for a school or a district to get credit for them having passed the STAAR exam. The master's level is, of course, it reflects students who have demonstrated exceptional mastery of tested material. And then the meets grade level is that they have achieved at the level that Texas considers whatever grade is for 3rd grade reading exam, as an example, or 5th grade math, whatever that level is. And though approaches is considered passing on the STAAR, the way the accountability calculations actually works, you get additional credit for students that achieve at the meets and master's level. And in order to get an A or a B in that domain 1 in particular, you actually do have to have quite a few students that are exceeding the approaches level in order for you as a campus or a district to get a high score in the student achievement domain. So I think that's one point. 2 other points I'll try to hit quickly on kind of the nuance here. The second one is this idea of growth versus proficiency, which I think we had a question in the chat, and I hope that this gets to it a little bit. When Dr. Amine was talking about the way the ratings work, we get to take the higher of domain 1, which is student achievement that I was just talking about, and domain 2, which encompasses growth. And so I think this is a great thing about the accountability system because it takes into account both growth and where students are just like achieving. And it actually gives schools and districts credit for whichever is higher. So this is one way, going back to the point previously about context, that the system tries to recognize the different contexts in which schools exist. Because by using whichever is higher of a campus or district's growth or achievement, it gives credit to schools that are doing work to help the students grow at higher than average rates, while also recognizing schools that may already have their students achieving at high levels. So again, it recognizes that progress. And then the last piece I'll talk about is the 3rd domain, closing the gaps, which also speaks to there's a significant progress element to the way that's calculated as well. So it recognizes that there are different historical gaps in how different student groups have served, and that's one of the things we as an education system have to grapple with and try to solve for. And so this domain 3 really tries to measure how well are we doing as a system at closing those historical gaps and ensuring that the students that need additional resources and need additional supports are getting them and closing those gaps, even if they aren't currently achieving where the system says they should be. At least we are doing the work necessary to get them there eventually and to, again, close those gaps.
I'm gonna jump in and stamp because we've gotten some questions around STAAR and like biases towards students that are economically disadvantaged or capturing the experience of historically marginalized groups. And I think you're actually touching on it right here. So for those listening and who are dropping those questions in the chat, wanted to pause and make sure that their questions are getting answered in terms of what you're saying. So if you could, it's just like in a 2-sentence summarize what you just said, because I think it answers, I'll ask the question, I'll combine a few questions from the chat. How does STAAR kind of balance any bias towards students that are economically disadvantaged or capturing the experience and understanding of historically marginalized groups within that?
So yeah, I think this is a really important question, and one that, again, the accountability system really tries to account for via that domain 3, which is called closing the gaps for a reason. It is looking at how are we doing as a system at addressing the needs of students from historically marginalized backgrounds, and ensuring that they are receiving the education they deserve and closing those historical achievement gaps. And schools and districts are given credit for making progress towards closing those gaps. And then the other piece I think that's important, I'll note really quickly, is the other piece of domain 2. We've talked a lot about growth. The other piece is called that you can use in your score is called relative performance, which looks at how well you as a school or a district are doing at serving those students from historically marginalized backgrounds. And if your students from those backgrounds are performing at higher levels relative to schools with similar demographic compositions, you can get that can be your domain 2 score. So you also can get credit if you are a system that is doing particularly well with those students via that relative performance component.
Yeah, I think I will just add to that, Patrick, just to your point, is that really it goes back to the design of the accountability system in these 3 different domains, and really domain 3 being the domain that really drills down at the student group performance, and we take that into account when we create the overall. Another way to look at it maybe is that a campus might be excelling in meeting the need of a student group, and that piece becomes one piece of a bigger puzzle. So it contributes because the system is taking into account from that domain 3, really the performance at the student group level. Of course, student groups count in the all students. So everybody really is included. We just kind of focus more on that equity piece and looking at disaggregating the data from an equity perspective in domain 3.
Thank you. Okay. So we know the accountability system is an important tool for equity, quality, data-driven instruction. Like, we've debunked the myth that it was intended as a performance tool, but rather it's an accountability in the name, accountability for the system. We understand that it is a foundational indicator of academic achievement, and it can be used alongside other indicators to get like a broader view and a holistic understanding of the student experience. We celebrate A's and B's, of course, that is a feat. And we also understand that it is growth and proficiency. So a school can be an A, and we're still needing to see growth maybe in some subgroups from what I'm hearing and understanding. I'm going to move us to our 4th myth. The 4th one. Ooh, sorry, y'all. Where did we land on that 4th myth? The 4th myth was, apologies to everyone listening, my screen is not loading. Go ahead.
I think it was the work stops when accountability is delayed.
Yes, the work stops. We've seen in the news, accountability is delayed. It was delayed last year. It's legal. We're not getting into that. But what we do want to know is it true? Does the work stop when accountability is delayed?
I'll jump in. So the accountability system and ratings are based on the statewide assessments, just like Patrick shared before. So we receive the statewide assessment results several weeks after the assessments are given. And of course, our parents and students and the community also have access to the assessment results through a portal that they can see, they can access this, they can look at their student results, they can look at the individual questions that their students have taken, look at their responses, and get information about how students perform. That information, we receive it way before any accountability information is produced. So for the most part, these results are typically available to parents in the summer, and we always encourage our students and families to access these results. We rely on these results to inform summer school. So regardless of the accountability information that comes later, we use this level of information at the assessment level, of course, with students to look at their questions, see which ones they got correct, and most importantly, which ones they missed, and understand why. looking at mistakes and understanding why they got the item incorrect is kind of an important aspect of the learning cycle. From a teaching cycle as well in perspective, we also look at the assessment results and align them to how we taught the content. So we use protocols to allow our teachers and teams to reflect on their lesson plans, meaning how did I teach that concept and how did my students perform when I look at that particular item that is maybe measuring that particular standard. We look at using it for goal settings. So at the beginning of the year, it is one data point that our students are coming with from the spring. So we look at it and we use it as a data point. We look at item analysis that allows our teachers and content teams to look at specific items to understand misconceptions. So there are a variety of ways that we really utilize the information at the student level, at the teacher level, at the content level, at the program level. Another thing to remember is that the statewide assessment program that really is summarized to create the accountability ratings is one snapshot of a student's proficiency at that point in time. So, but throughout the year, we rely heavily on other indicators like checking for understandings, what happens in the classroom, different exit tickets, different locally developed assessments that we utilize to assess and kind of gauge the level of proficiency of our students. So there are a lot of different things that we use and constantly kind of look at in order for us to continue to kind of the work, to continue to build that proficiency. So in a way, maybe in a nutshell, if you would to summarize it, is, it's important to note that the work that we pour into our students and teachers and staff never stops. And we do that because we want to see our students succeed. We want them to leave every day knowing that we have made kind of a difference in their lives and really their proficiency level. So, so that's what we do in kind of terms to shape their trajectory. So the accountability system is one data point. It is not the only thing that drives us to do what we do for the students and families. It is one data point, and we rely on it and we incorporate it as we kind of attempt always to better understand the proficiency of our students so that we can develop the plans, implement strategies, and adjust so that we can continue to serve.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that's really hearing about all the incredible things y'all are doing at Alief to like serve your students, I think is really great and really insightful, and I appreciate it, Dr. Amine. I do want to make sure we don't lose sight of what we don't have when we don't have accountability ratings. I think they are, and particularly us as a public, we as a public, like what you're talking about right now isn't necessarily something that I like have access to, right, as a parent. So this opportunity to like see how my school is doing or other schools in my neighborhood are doing, we lose that. And I think what you're talking about takes all kinds of resources and capacity and staff. And I want to kind of contextualize it. There's over 1,200 school districts in the state of Texas. Relatively, Alief is quite a large one because the average district size of those 1,200 is only about 4,500 total students. And 900 of the 1,200 have fewer than 3,000 students. So you can imagine most districts are much smaller. And in the absence of the accountability and associated data that comes from the state of Texas, those districts just simply may not have the internal capacity or resources to be able to target the kinds of supports you're talking about, identify gaps in the way that hopefully in its ideal form, the accountability system allows. So the work is awesome and it definitely continues, but I do want to make sure that we're keeping in mind what we lose when we lose accountability, when we don't have it.
So what I'm hearing is, accountability does help districts make strategic decisions about resourcing and what schools need support. And it's also publicly for the community, it's a really good, transparent tool. And the work doesn't stop. The kids are coming in schools, the districts are open, decisions are being made. It is a tool that is needed to make strategic decisions. And, we're seeing, like you said, with many districts, Alief, in Houston, I feel like it's most of our districts you're seeing in Dallas, Garland, they're using their own capacity and brain power to run the reports and make their own predictions because the work isn't going to stop. So there's, the accountability is needed and that it is needed to make decisions. And so districts have to move forward and, figure out the accountability, make some predictions on their own, and use their own capacity to do that. And they are. We're seeing that districts who have the capacity, Dr. Amine, I am not in your office. I don't quite know exactly what you're doing, but I would imagine that the district has taken on that job of finding the accountability ratings and also using other assessments, other forms of data gathering and inputs. There's lots of inputs that are going into the strategic decisions, and accountability is a really big part of that. And the work can't stop. So we appreciate the amount of energy that all of our Houston districts have put into making sure that the work doesn't stop and that they are running, like you said, you've got those stars, you are running those STAAR scores, you are making predictions for schools, and you are continuing to move forward. And our students and communities greatly appreciate that you are still making data-driven decisions. That timeline is not stopped. Them kids are in the building, and you've got to know what schools need, what resources, where we have strengths, where we have gaps, and what we're going to do about it. And so we thank you for continuing to do that. I know it's an extra push for your office, so
that's why we exist.
Yes, thank you. All right, we've breezed through our 4 myths. For those listening, we do have some links if you would like to check out we've got our data dashboard, some STAAR preliminary results, and we'll drop them in, but also those who are listening will share them later for those who are interested in looking at what some of the data looks like across the city of Houston. Also, many districts have done their own analysis, and if you have a student or you are a community member and you want to reach out, I'm kind of speaking for the district, but Dr. Amine, I kind of feel like districts are generally putting out data and happy to engage with community members.
Absolutely. We share data during lots of public meetings. We go out to the community and share data. We have a cadence of meetings that we have. So I think it's the purpose really is to share as much information, because we're constantly seeking feedback and input from our community so that we can drive our programs, drive our strategic priorities. Once we meet a target, we immediately move on to the next target. So goals are set and metrics are set, and just like the learning cycle, we try to work backwards. So if this is where we want to be in 5 years, what do we need to do this year, next year, and the following year?
Thank you. All right, we have folks who are waiting for some answers. So I'm going to just kind of ask some of the questions that I'm getting in the chat. I may consolidate some of them for people that are listening if we have questions that are similar, just for time. And then we ask everyone to stay on for the Q&A. You may hear a question that you didn't even know you were thinking. Let's get into it. Are there any instances, or let's think, do school systems use this to direct resources towards schools? So if the accountability system in that data is ever used to direct resources?
So I think the accountability ratings typically, when they are released, come also with list of interventions, list of like actions that would take place as a result of the ratings. And those could include also additional resources that a campus may receive because of their ratings. So I think, in general, that definitely is something that is used to drive resources, but also in different school districts, the information from performance, accountability or assessments or comprehensive needs assessments of different campuses really is used to drive the resources that are needed for the campus to meet and exceed, standards and really kind of serve their student body.
I think I heard some of this answered earlier, and you're kind of speaking to it now, but we've got a couple of questions just about providing resources equitably, and is that part of the intent of the accountability system?
Yeah, I think that's really fundamental to the system, is to identify gaps and then provide resources, both financial and also to what Dr. Amine was just talking about, recommendations for different supports that can be provided to those areas and student groups that are identified as needing it. Like this, the system is grounded in equity and identifying where the gaps are so that we as a system can address them and serve all students the way they deserve.
Perfect. One of the things that I think I would add to that as well is the resources that identify best practices and high-performing schools are available to all schools. And I know for us, for example, that is a resource that we tap into every day. So it's, it's kind of all packaged under the Effective Schools framework, and that is accessible to all. So of course, campuses that need that extra support get more oversight and support in that area. But we, for example, have tapped into it kind of early and have made it available to all our schools. And we kind of monitor that implementation at all schools. Just to make sure there's room for growth everywhere. There's continuous improvement possible at every level, everywhere, every campus. So we leverage that resource in order to drive improvements regardless of, where the campus is or maybe their level of performance, because there is a room for growth.
To be clear, that package of resources is provided by TEA? Or is that it? Yeah,
absolutely. It is. It's provided by TEA. It's available for all districts. It is a wealth of resources and information that really, in a nutshell, describes the best practices that high-performing schools utilize.
Thank you. We've got a bit of a technical question. So we have an attendee asking, I think I heard that the higher score from domain 1 and domain 2 is the one factored into accountability. I think when you were explaining earlier, do we know which domain schools typically score better in? And do we have any thoughts on why? So Patrick or Dr. Amine, do we know what domain 1 or 2 schools typically score better in?
So I think this is a really interesting question because I think it kind of depends on the year. One thing we saw when ratings were released in 2022 was we were coming up, off the heel. This was the first year of ratings coming off the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, which, as we all know, had really significant effects on education across the country, not just here in Houston, but across the country. And it really impacted student learning in like really significant ways. And so in 2022, when we had ratings come out, ratings to the point about was it growth or proficiency, because students on STAAR in 2021, which to be clear, STAAR in 2021 was not required for all students, it was optional. However, the students who took it, again in 2022, coming off this being remote learning, and then that was the first full year back of in-person learning, we saw really high growth. Kind of across the board because students were coming back and getting reacclimated to school and to learning. And that drove, in that year, we saw a much higher proportion of schools using that growth component than would have happened in a particular year. And you can kind of see this visualized. I think one of the links in the chat is to the Good Reason Houston data dashboard. And you can kind of see that visualized, the comparison of the growth component from 2019, which was the prior year with ratings, to 2022. Because I think it's really fascinating. We don't have ratings for 23 and 24 official ratings, so I can't speak to the effects there, but I do know that 2022 was a really kind of an outlier year in that sense.
Thank you for that. I know we're running on time. I'm trying to go in the order they're coming in. In publishing the A through F grade, is there somewhere that people can see the actual formula and scores for each domain? Not just the letter grade the school got? Is that made publicly somewhere?
Absolutely. When the accountability manual typically contains kind of a lot of technical information, and the accountability manual is published online. You can look at the different versions of it, and that kind of gives you, it's a little bit of a technical, document, but it provides all the details behind kind of the overall system and how the different domains contribute to that overall system.
Mhm.
I believe texasschools.gov also has the domain scores for individual campuses. It's txschools.gov. It's the state's public facing. I think Miran mentioned it earlier. And so you can see schools' ratings there in addition to other information. I believe it has the domain scores for individual campuses.
Yep, yep. And we will, when we send the resources at the end, we'll also add that, and Dr. Amin will find the link and we'll add what you're referencing. So folks, if you're listening, all the things we're referencing will be coming to you in a package after if you had registered. I know we have 5 minutes left. It is a Friday. Some of you are joining us on a lunch break, so I want to make sure to respect time. Before you all leave, feedback is a gift that we always ask for. So before you hop off, we're going to ask you to take a minute to take our feedback survey and, just give us thoughts. We'll be doing this every month. And so we'd love to hear from you on ways to make it better. In the next 2 weeks, also, we will be receiving more data that will help us look at how Houston stacks up against the state. And so as always, we'll be analyzing that data and putting it out for the public on our website. So we encourage you to go check that out. We also invite you to join us at our next webinar. We'll be talking more about student achievement in Houston in specifics when we get that data. And we'll be taking a look at how our systems are performing on the STAAR test as compared to the state on next month's webinar. So stay connected with us. Again, if there are things you are really interested in, please give it to us on the feedback survey. These webinars are only as good as the information that people are interested in and are searching for. In the meantime, stay connected with us by joining our Connect Ed mailing list. So Patrick and his research and data team send out a newsletter every month so stay connected. We also send out the Learning Curve, which is an analysis of all the things in public ed news over the month. And so we send that out for those who are just looking for the headlines. As always, we thank you for coming on, joining us today on this Friday. We look forward to seeing you next month. If you want to stay connected to Dr. Amin and Patrick, because they are such a wealth of knowledge. And Dr. Amin, it says behind you, do what you love. And I truly believe that you do what you love. The passion you bring to this work is really appreciated. Patrick, one day I will be able to look at data and analyze it as fast and wonderfully as you and create stories around it. But for those of you who want to stay connected to them, please feel free to connect with them at their LinkedIn or it's not Twitter, X. We'll drop those in the chat and we'll also send them with the resources if you'd like to follow them and see what they're talking about on LinkedIn and X. Stay connected. Thank you all for joining. And please take a minute to give feedback before you hop off. We appreciate you all. Happy Friday. Dr. Amin, Patrick, any last? We've got a couple of minutes.
Thanks to everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Dr. Amin.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
All right, y'all. I'll stay on to give people some time to complete the feedback survey before they hop off with these last 2 minutes. Patrick and Dr. Amin, thank you so much for joining. And if we didn't get to your question and you want to stay on, I can type some of the answers. I'll leave the chat open so that I can try to respond. I hate to leave people's questions unanswered. So please stay on if you still have a question that you want answered. And I'll be trying to type in as I can from what I heard. Thanks, y'all. Happy Friday.